Before she passed away, my grandmother said, "Don't forgive what your mother did." My name is Jesse Whitman. My grandmother's final words weren't about love. They weren't about heaven. They were a warning. A sentence carved into my soul like a commandment. Don't forgive what your mother did. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. The room was dim, the hospice lights low, as if the world already knew she was fading. I remember the faint smell of lavender lotion on her skin, the soft whir of the oxygen machine. I held her hand cold but steady, and I thought we were going to have a moment of peace. I thought she might whisper something gentle, something a boy needs to hear from the only person who ever truly loved him. But instead, her lips moved with effort, her voice raspy and deliberate. "Jesse," she said, locking her eyes into mine. "Promise me, don't forgive your mother, not ever." I blinked. I waited for more, for context, for warmth. But those were the last words she ever said. She passed away that night, and I was left holding her hand, with no comfort, just questions. At first I thought it was the pain speaking, the morphine, the decades of resentment finally breaking through. But the look in her eyes, that was clarity. That was conviction. She meant it. And if you knew what I knew about my mother, if you had lived what I lived, you'd understand why forgiveness was never on the table. But I didn't always know. That's the worst part. There was a time before the truth unraveled when I still clung to the hope that my mother was simply a woman who'd made mistakes, that she was just broken, not malicious, a victim of circumstance, someone I could understand if I just tried hard enough. I clung to that illusion for years. It began when I was 9. My parents had just divorced. My dad wasn't really in the picture. He left quietly, like someone slipping out of a party before the music ends. My mother was granted full custody. And my grandmother, my dad's mother, she was the only consistent love I had. She'd raised me as much as my parents had, maybe more. I used to sit at her kitchen table coloring with crayons while she made cornbread and told me stories about when she was a little girl on a farm. She never raised her voice, never needed to. Her voice carried not because it was loud, but because it was real. After the custody hearing, she hugged me tight and promised, "I'll always be here, Jesse, no matter what happens." But that didn't turn out to be true, at least not in the way I thought. A few months later, we moved to another state suddenly without warning. I didn't even get to say goodbye to her. My mother told me casually, "Your grandmother's not well enough to visit. And frankly, Jesse, she's not interested in being a part of your life anymore." I didn't understand. I was just a kid. I believed her, but something inside me ached in a way I couldn't explain. A dull, cold spot in my chest that throbbed every holiday, every birthday, every school event where I waited hoping my grandmother might magically appear. She never did. And when I asked about her, my mother's response was always the same. "She was never as sweet as you remember. She only liked you when it was convenient." There was a venom in her tone, a bitterness I didn't understand. But over time, I stopped asking. I buried the questions under school and video games and pretending I was okay. I stopped wondering until I turned 18. That year I got a letter. A real letter, not email, not a text, a letter. Yellowed with age, addressed in delicate handwriting I hadn't seen since I was a boy. My grandmother. It had been mailed years ago, somehow never reached me, and yet here it was wedged inside an old book in a box my mother had forgotten to throw away. Inside, she wrote, "Jesse, I've written you so many letters. I don't know if your mother gives them to you, but I want you to know I never stopped loving you. I never stopped thinking of you. I pray every day that you know the truth one day. You are my heart." I remember just staring at it, my hands shaking, the words burning holes into everything I thought I knew. That letter undid years of false memories. It cracked open something in me I thought was long dead. And I realized my mother hadn't been telling the truth. She stole my childhood. She erased my grandmother from my life like she was some mistake to be deleted. That's when I started digging, and the more I dug, the uglier it got. My grandmother's final words weren't just a bitter goodbye. They were a map, and I was about to follow it. They say the devil doesn't come with horns and fire. He comes wearing your mother's perfume and a smile that makes strangers say, "What a lovely woman." My mother was beautiful, graceful, the kind of woman who made heads turn in grocery stores and PTA meetings. To outsiders, she was everything a mother should be: polite, intelligent, soft-spoken, even generous when she wanted people to see. But behind closed doors, there was ice in her voice and cruelty in her silence. She never yelled. She didn't need to. Her silence could cut deeper than any scream. When I was a child, I thought she was just strict, maybe a little cold. But after that letter, the one I found at 18, I started remembering things I had buried, things I'd been too young to understand. Like the time I drew a picture in kindergarten, it was of my grandmother and me baking cookies. I brought it home proud and smiling. My teacher had even written a note on the back, "Jesse has such a strong bond with his grandmother. It's beautiful." When I handed it to my mom, she looked at it, smiled, and then fed it straight into the shredder. No words, just the sound of crayon-scratched paper being torn apart. I stared blinking, not knowing whether I should cry or apologize. That was her specialty in visible punishments, things you couldn't explain to anyone else. She didn't hit me. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she undermined, dismissed, lied with a kind tone and a warm face. After we moved states, she created a new world for me, one where my grandmother had cut ties where my father had chosen to disappear, and where she alone was the glue holding our fragile life together. And I believed her, because what else could a child do? I started to absorb her version of reality. I stopped asking questions. I stopped missing people. I even started defending her. When I was 12, a neighbor asked me if I ever saw my grandmother. I replied with a shrug. She didn't want anything to do with us. I remember the neighbor looking at me like I had just said something sad. I didn't understand why back then, but I do now, because that was never the truth. That was my mother's truth, the perfect lie. She had rewritten history so meticulously that even I couldn't see the edits. And the worst part, she was admired for it. She got sympathy for raising a child alone. She wore that role like a badge of honor. People would say things like, "You've done such an amazing job raising Jesse all on your own." And she'd give this humble nod like she hadn't destroyed an entire family system behind the scenes. That's how she operated, quietly powerful, ruthlessly strategic. But when I found that letter in the attic, I realized she had slipped. That box wasn't meant to survive the move. She must have missed it, or maybe she thought she had destroyed everything in it. But there it was, a box full of yellowed envelopes. Hundreds of them, all from my grandmother, all addressed to me, all never opened. They spanned over a decade. Birthday cards, Christmas greetings, notes with little stickers and drawings, letters written in a shaking hand as my grandmother aged some joyful others, heartbreakingly desperate. "Jesse, I miss you so much. I dream of you often. I sent you a sweater. I hope your mother gave it to you. Please don't forget me. I'll always be your Nan." I sat on the floor of the attic, surrounded by the truth, a truth my mother had buried under 10 years of well-practiced lies. And something inside me snapped. The illusion shattered. I went downstairs, box in hand, and for the first time in my life, I saw my mother clearly. Not as mom, but as the architect of my isolation, the author of my emotional exile. I walked into the kitchen where she sat with her tea and crossword the afternoon light, casting soft shadows across her perfectly curated life. I dropped the box on the table. She looked at it, expression neutral, then looked at me. "Oh," she said so calmly it chilled me. "I see you found those." That was it. No apology, no shock, no explanation, just confirmation, as if she were proud, as if the betrayal wasn't betrayal at all, just inevitability. I opened my mouth, but the words tangled in my throat. Rage was there, but it had nowhere to go. Finally, I managed. "You lied to me. You stole my life from her, from me." She sipped her tea. "I protected you, Jesse," she said. "You don't know the full story." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because I realized how long I'd been manipulated, controlled, turned against the one person who actually loved me without condition. "I'll find out the full story," I said, "and when I do, I'm going to make sure no one ever sees you the same way again." She didn't flinch. "Be careful, Jesse," she said with a slight smile. "Some stones are better left unturned." I left the house that night and didn't come back. Not for holidays, not for calls, not for anything. And from that moment forward, I was no longer her son. I was something else. I was her reckoning. They say you can't miss what you never had. But what about the things you had and were told never existed? What if every warm memory, every bedtime story, every hug, every Sunday morning, pancake was erased so skillfully you stopped believing they were ever real? That's what my mother did to me. She didn't just take my grandmother away. She took away my sense of truth. After I left the house with the box of letters, I spent days going through them, not just reading, feeling every word. Some of them had little drawings, smiley faces, or stickers I vaguely remembered, like echoes from a life I once lived. There was one in particular, a note tucked inside a birthday card that hit me like a punch to the chest. I hope you like the train set. I remembered how you loved watching them go in circles when you were little. Happy 6th birthday, my boy. I wish I could see you blow out your candles. A train set. I remembered a train set. I remembered opening it, playing with it, but I never remembered her being the one who gave it to me. My mother had told me it was from her coworker. I didn't think twice about it at the time. I was 6. I was just excited to have something with buttons and wheels. But now, I saw it clearly. That was her strategy. She didn't destroy the gifts. She redirected them, rebranded them, made sure that any joy I associated with others got tied back to her. It was subtle, but devastating. She took every act of kindness from my grandmother and rewrote it as her own. And when I asked, as I often did, why doesn't Grandma call anymore, or can we visit her at Christmas? She always had an answer. Polished, practiced, believable. Jessie, she's very busy these days. Sweetheart, she's getting older. She doesn't travel much. She said she'd rather you spend the holidays with me. She told me my grandmother was selfish, cold. She said you're too young to remember how she really is. But I did remember. I remembered falling asleep in her lap while she hummed lullabies. I remembered her knitting little scarves for my stuffed animals. I remembered her squeezing my hand 3 times our secret code for I love you. And yet, she was erased from my life like a stain on a photograph. Years of memories rewritten by someone who called herself Mother. I felt hollow, like my own history had been stolen. Worse still, I began to realize how alone I had been. Because once my grandmother was gone from my world, there was no one left to protect me. My mother didn't abuse me in the way people recognize. She didn't lock me in closets or beat me with belts, but emotional abuse, neglect, gaslighting. She was an expert. When I cried, she told me I was being dramatic. When I got hurt, she said I was weak. When I asked questions, she called me ungrateful. She always made it about her sadness, her sacrifices, her pain. It didn't matter what I felt. I existed to reflect her suffering. At 13, I told her I was feeling depressed, that I didn't like school, that I had trouble making friends. She didn't hug me. She didn't ask what was wrong. She said, "Do you know how hard it is to raise a child alone? You think you're struggling," and that was that. She turned my pain into a competition, one I could never win. And yet to the outside world, she was a hero. I had teachers tell me, "Your mom's amazing." Parents at school events would say, "She's so strong doing it all on her own." I used to smile and nod. I didn't have the words back then to explain what was really happening, but now I do. Now I know she weaponized pity. She used her single mother narrative like a shield deflecting any suspicion, building sympathy wherever she went. Meanwhile, I was drowning, and then came the worst realization of all. My grandmother knew. She knew this would happen. That's why she fought so hard for custody during the divorce. She knew what her son, my father, refused to see. She knew what the court wouldn't believe, and she tried to protect me, but the system didn't. My mother played her cards right. She cried in front of the judge. She brought character witnesses. She spun a tale of a controlling mother-in-law in a chaotic household. She painted herself as the victim, the single mom just trying to give her son a stable life, and the court believed her. She got full custody, and the first thing she did, she moved me far away, cut off all contact, changed her number, made sure I'd never hear from my grandmother again until that box, until I found the truth. And once I did, there was no going back. You can't undo that kind of betrayal. You can't pretend it didn't happen. You can either bury it, or you can dig deeper and burn it down from the roots. So that's what I decided to do. But let me ask you this. If you were in this situation, would you forgive or would you take revenge? Comment below to let us know. You'd think that once you find the truth, you'd feel free, liberated, unburdened. But in my case, the truth made me angrier, not just because of what happened, but because of how long it had worked. I started with the box of letters, trying to organize them by date. Each one was like a time capsule, a tiny glimpse into a moment I never got to live. The letters started when I was around 5. Some were just short notes with stickers or drawings. Others were full pages full of love and longing. One had a photograph of me tiny laughing sitting in my grandmother's lap. On the back in her handwriting, he always felt safe with me. The dates continued one after another until I was around 16. 16. That meant even as a teenager, even as I thought she had abandoned me, she was still writing, still hoping I'd read her words someday. My mother had stolen a decade's worth of love and memory and stashed it in an attic like trash. But something else caught my eye. One of the later letters, dated around my 14th birthday, had something different. Taped inside was a receipt for a registered package. My grandmother had tried sending me something valuable. Jewelry, maybe, a keepsake. But the tracking showed it was returned, recipient rejected. I called the postal service. They couldn't help. Too much time had passed, but that package stuck with me. It meant my grandmother hadn't just sent letters. She'd tried sending herself back into my life gifts, reminders, presents. And every time my mother made sure it never reached me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her, to hold the letters in her face and demand answers. But I knew better. People like my mother don't confess. They control. And if I confronted her too soon, she'd just twist it all again, play the victim cry about how I misunderstood everything. So I stayed quiet, and I started planning. First I digitized every letter, scanned them, photographed them. I wanted a record, something that couldn't accidentally disappear if she ever found out I had them. Then I started making calls. I reached out to anyone who might have known my grandmother, old neighbors, family friends, church contacts. Most hadn't spoken to her in years, but a few remembered things. I always thought it was strange how suddenly she stopped bringing you around. One said, "She told me once she was afraid your mom was poisoning you against her." Another said, quietly. Then one call changed everything. A woman named Edith. She had been my grandmother's closest friend. They met in their 20s, worked together at a sewing shop, and had stayed close through the decades. Edith was in her 70s now, sharp, kind, but weary. When I told her who I was, there was a long silence. Then she said, "I've been waiting for you to find me." She invited me to visit, and what she showed me turned everything I knew on its head. Edith lived in a modest house filled with doily sunlight in the scent of cinnamon tea. She pulled out a small metal box, carefully preserved. "This," she said, "is what your grandmother asked me to hold for you, in case she didn't get the chance." Inside were copies of some of the same letters I'd already found, but also more. Letters my mother must have intercepted and destroyed. But that wasn't all. There were also journals, handwritten entries, dozens of them, entries that chronicled the years my grandmother fought for custody and lost. Entries about her suspicions that my mother was manipulating the court, notes on every phone call she'd attempted, every birthday she was denied, every time she stood at the end of a driveway hoping to catch a glimpse of me only to be turned away. She documented everything, and then Edith pulled out the final item, a sealed envelope marked only to be opened if Jessie ever comes looking. Inside was a letter addressed to me, a different kind of letter. "My sweet Jessie, if you're reading this, it means you found what your mother tried to hide. It means you're strong, just like I always knew you were. I don't know what she's told you about me. I don't know if you even remember my voice, but I need you to know this. You were never forgotten, not for a second. I tried, Jessie. I tried to fight. The courts didn't believe me, and I didn't have the money to keep pushing. Your mother was always clever, always calculating. She knew how to make people believe her. I wasn't strong enough to stop her, and for that, I'm so sorry. But I never gave up on you. I love you more than you'll ever know. Don't forgive what she did not unless she truly earns it. Love, always, Nan." I broke down in that moment. I hadn't cried like that in years, because finally, someone was speaking the truth, and that truth shattered the lies I'd lived in for most of my life. I stayed at Edith's house until nightfall. We talked for hours about who my grandmother really was, her quirks, her bravery, her stubborn kindness. And as I drove home, something shifted in me. This wasn't just about grief anymore. This was about justice. This was about reclaiming everything I'd been denied. And the next step was going to expose my mother in a way she never saw it coming. There's a kind of silence that only comes before war. Not chaos, not yelling, just stillness. That's what I felt as I stood in my mother's driveway, a calm so sharp it could cut glass. I hadn't been here in years, not since I walked out with that box of stolen letters. Not since she looked me in the eye and said, "Be careful what stones you turn over." Well, I had turned them all over, and now I knew what lay beneath them. My plan had been to wait, to build my case, to gather every bit of truth, every record, every testimony. But after reading my grandmother's final letter at Edith's house, I couldn't wait anymore. I needed to see her face when I told her what I knew. She opened the door like she had been expecting me. That's the thing about my mother, she's never rattled. She wears calm like armor. "Jessie," she said, stepping aside. "I figured you'd come sooner or later." I didn't respond. I walked past her into the kitchen. Same spotless counter, same scent of chamomile tea, same meticulously curated life. She followed me, her heels tapping softly on the tile. "You found more, didn't you?" I laid the envelope from Edith's box on the table, the one labeled only to be opened if Jessie ever comes looking. She didn't touch it. She just stared. "That's her handwriting," she said softly. "And you kept it from me," I replied, my voice steady. "You kept everything from me." She finally sat down, crossed her legs, tilted her head the way she always did when she wanted to appear reasonable. "I did what I had to," she said. "You wouldn't understand. Try me." She sighed like this was all some exhausting burden for her. "Your grandmother was a manipulator. She had control over everything, your father, the money, the house. She wanted to raise you to hate me." "That's not true," I said. "You made that up. She loved me. She fought for me. She wanted to own you, Jessie." She spoke the words so calmly as if they were facts, as if my childhood pain were just a chess move on her board. I pulled out the copies of the registered package receipts, the scanned letters, the journals, the list of names and contact numbers from Edith's testimony. I laid it all out in front of her like a dossier, then explained these, I said. She didn't even look. "Are you recording this?" she asked. "No." "Should've," she muttered. Then she smiled. That smile, I swear, was the most chilling thing I've ever seen. "I knew one day you'd dig," she said. "You always had that in you, that need to understand people, to pull things apart, just like your grandmother. You lied to me for years," I said. "You isolated me, made me think she didn't love me, that she forgot me. You rewrote my life. And look how strong you are now," she said. "You think that's a coincidence?" I blinked. "What you became who you are because of what I did," she said simply. "You're independent, smart, you don't trust anyone easily. That's protection, Jessie. The world is cruel. I prepared you." I stared at her in disbelief. She wasn't sorry. She wasn't even defensive. She was proud. All this time I thought maybe she was ashamed, that some part of her regretted what she did. But no, this wasn't guilt. It was strategy. "You didn't prepare me," I said. "You broke me. And now I'm going to undo everything you built on that lie." She laughed softly, almost like a sigh. "And what exactly do you think you're going to do, Jessie?" "I've already started," I said. I told her about the lawyer Edith connected me with, the one who handled my grandmother's estate before my mother seized control. I told her about the older will, the real will, the one that left everything to me. I told her about the family friends ready to testify that she blocked contact between us. "You forged documents," I said. "You committed fraud." Her face didn't move. I saw her blink once, slowly. Then she leaned forward and said, "Be careful, Jessie. Truth can make people ugly. And the more you dig, the more you risk becoming like me." That line, that twisted prophecy. I stood up. "You don't get to play philosopher now," I said. "You don't get to rewrite this." She said nothing. I walked to the door. Before I stepped out, she called after me, voice still composed but colder than ever. "If you burn it all down, don't be surprised when it burns you too." I didn't respond, but in that moment I knew something she didn't. I wasn't afraid of fire anymore. Because sometimes the only way to rebuild is to watch the old house burn. There's something strange that happens when you start looking into your own history. You begin to see yourself not as the protagonist, but as a puzzle piece someone else shaped. And in my case, that someone was my mother. After confronting her, I realized something deeply unsettling. If she had been able to erase my grandmother from my life so completely, what else had she done that I didn't know about? What else was buried under decades of smiles, lies, and beautifully packaged falsehoods? I didn't want to just burn down what she did to me. I wanted to expose her. So I started digging. The first place I looked was her old high school. I didn't expect much, but records were public enough that I could confirm certain details: yearbooks, honor rolls, addresses. That's when I discovered her maiden name had once been connected to a juvenile report, sealed but flagged in a digital archive. I reached out to a local clerk who owed a favor to a friend of Edith's. They couldn't share much, but they confirmed something that stunned me. At age 16, my mother had been accused of stealing from her foster family. Foster family. That was the first shock. She had never mentioned being in the system. According to her, she came from a quiet little home with strict but loving parents. That was a lie. According to court documents and archived housing records, her biological parents lost custody of her when she was 12, severe neglect. She spent the next 6 years bouncing from home to home. No wonder she was such a skilled manipulator. She learned it as a survival tactic. But instead of healing from it, she became it. I tracked down one of her former foster siblings, a man named Darren who now ran a tire shop 2 towns over. We met in a diner. I showed him a photo. He looked at it for 2 seconds and said, "That's Rachel. Haven't thought about her in years. She was trouble, man. Trouble how I asked." He leaned back, smart as hell. But she knew how to turn adults against each other. Played favorites, made up stories, got people kicked out. She even told one foster dad that his wife was cheating just to see if he'd lose it. He did. He sipped his coffee, then added, "She wasn't evil, just broken, dangerous if you got too close." I asked him if he remembered her ever mentioning a plan, a goal. He smiled. "Yeah, she used to say, 'One day I'll have a son, and he'll never need anyone but me.'" I went cold. She planned it. She had fantasized about building someone from scratch, someone dependent, isolated, malleable. Me. I wasn't her son. I was her project. But there was more. When I told Edith what I'd found, she gave me something she had kept, an old letter my mother wrote at 19, during a brief stint living with my grandmother. It wasn't sweet. It wasn't maternal. It was venom. You think you're better than me because you bake and sew and send out holiday cards. But you don't know how this world really works. I'm going to build a life that doesn't need you in it. The next year she met my father. He was kind, gentle, passive. Exactly the kind of man someone like her could control. And once I was born, she had the perfect opportunity to test her theory. When I think back on it, I realize how calculated it all was. She let my grandmother bond with me for a few years, let her do the work, create the warmth, and then once I loved her deeply, once I was truly attached, she tore it all away. Because that's the cruelest way to break someone. Not by denying love, but by giving it. Then making them believe they imagined it. Every thread I pulled led to another truth, another piece of her mask falling off. Even the church community she was part of back in our old town had stories. I tracked down the pastor's daughter, now in her 30s. She remembered me. "You were such a quiet boy," she said. "I always felt like you were trying to disappear." I asked about my mother. "She used to volunteer," she said. Always made sure people knew it. But she started a rumor once that a single mother in the choir was trying to seduce the pastor. Almost tore the place apart. No one ever proved it was her, but we all knew. Same pattern, sabotage, isolation, rewriting the story. By now I wasn't just angry, I was focused. I knew what I had to do next. The lawyer Edith introduced me to, Mr. Harrow, had finally confirmed it. The old will was real. My grandmother had filed it years before she passed, naming me as sole beneficiary. But it had been overwritten by a new document filed digitally, suspiciously close to her final days in hospice. We had signatures, we had timestamps, and they didn't match. Mr. Harrow nodded as he handed me the forensics report. This was forged. No doubt. We have a case. I stared at the papers. It wasn't just about property or money anymore. It was about truth. I looked at Harrow and said, "File the suit. I want her exposed." He nodded. And just like that, the war officially began. It's funny how the word inheritance makes people think of money, property, jewelry, bank accounts. But to me, inheritance meant something different. It was a betrayal with legal paperwork, a lie, notarized and sealed. Once the forensics came back confirming that my mother forged my grandmother's signature, everything started falling into place. The revised will, the real one, the altered power of attorney files, all of it created just weeks before my grandmother passed. At the time, I hadn't even known she was dying. My mother had told me she was stable, that hospice was just precautionary. She'd assured me there was no need to visit right. Now it's not serious. That lie still burns. Because while I believed her, my grandmother was fading, and my mother was busy stealing everything she had left. Mr. Harrow, the lawyer, was meticulous. He laid everything out on a whiteboard in his office. 2 wills, 2 dates, two completely different stories. In the older one, the authentic one, I was named as the sole beneficiary. My grandmother had written a note at the bottom. Jesse is the most honest person I know. He will know what to do with what I leave behind. He's the only one I trust. But in the forged version, everything went to my mother. Every asset, every account, even a small lake house that I didn't even know existed. She had filed it electronically using a proxy service and an e-signature app. But the digital trail was sloppy. It led back to her. We didn't have to guess anymore. She hadn't just isolated me emotionally. She'd erased my legal right to the last gift my grandmother had left me. It wasn't about greed for me. It was about what was taken, the memories, the moments, the chance to say goodbye, and then the final insult stealing her legacy right out from under me. I sat with Harrow across from the whiteboard, fists clenched. She thought she was smart, I said. She is smart, he replied, but she got arrogant. Arrogance is what opens the door for people like us. I filed the lawsuit 3 days later. It was quiet at first, legal letters, notices, formal language. But then a shift. She responded with her own lawyer. Denial across the board. Claimed I was the one trying to exploit the estate. That I'd been estranged for years, that I barely knew my grandmother. That word estranged, it made me sick, because I hadn't chosen the distance. She created it, then used it to justify her theft. She even submitted a character reference letter from a woman in her book club, stating that my mother had sacrificed everything to raise her son and had nothing but respect for her late mother-in-law. It was a joke, except it wasn't. It was strategy, because my mother knew something I hadn't considered. Public opinion matters. If she could shape the narrative, she could win legally or not. So I made a decision. I went public. I posted a thread online not naming her directly, but telling the story. My story. I included excerpts from the letters, scans of the birthday cards, the photo of me on her lap, her final note to me. The post went viral within days. Thousands of comments, messages, people sharing their own stories of being cut off from grandparents, manipulated by parents, betrayed by those closest to them. And then, a message in my inbox, from my father. We hadn't spoken in over 10 years. Jesse, I read your post. I had no idea. Can we talk? We met at a diner just outside town. He looked older. We both did. We sat in silence for a while before he finally said, I left because she made me feel like I didn't matter. I know the feeling, I said. She told me your grandmother didn't want to be involved anymore. Told me you didn't want to see me. She told me you abandoned us, I said. He looked down. I believed her. That was the moment I realized just how deep her manipulation went. It wasn't just me. It was everyone. She had turned all of us into ghosts in each other's lives, and she stood in the center of it, looking innocent, baking cookies. My father handed me an envelope. Inside were bank statements, copies of conversations with hospice staff, and old voicemails my grandmother had left him saying she was worried about me. It was more evidence, more truth, and we weren't done. Mr. Harrow added it all to the case file. You've got enough to win, he said. I nodded, but I didn't just want to win. I wanted to strip her mask away. I wanted the world to see the woman who taught me how to smile while lying, and I was getting close, very close. The truth doesn't scream, it doesn't pound its fists or shout through a megaphone. It waits, patient, steady, like my grandmother always was, and now, it was ready to speak. Mr. Harrow called me just after 7 a.m. on a Monday. She did more than just forge your grandmother's signature, he said. I was still groggy, but his voice had that tone sharp and serious. What do you mean? She suppressed the original will, intentionally. He explained that when a person files a new will, any previous documents are supposed to be disclosed, especially if another party is named as a beneficiary. But in our case, my mother hadn't just ignored that step. She had actively hidden the original. The one naming me as the sole heir, it had never been revoked properly, and the notary who allegedly signed the newer version. Fake. I sat up straight. Are you telling me it's invalid? I asked. Not only is it invalid, Harrow said, but her actions may qualify as criminal suppression of testamentary documents. That's felony territory. I let the word sink in. Criminal, not just fraud, not just manipulation. Criminal. But Harrow wasn't done. There's more, he said. Check your email. I opened it. Attached was a scanned letter, handwritten, dated 6 months before my grandmother's death. It had been found in her safe deposit box, alongside a physical copy of the will, notarized, witnessed, sealed. In the letter she wrote, "If this document is ever contested or withheld, let it be known I did not alter my wishes. I want Jesse to receive everything I leave behind. He is my only true family." My chest tightened. The ink was shaky, but the intent was clear. She had known. She knew my mother would try to erase me again. She tried to protect me even in death. I drove to the safe deposit bank that same day to see the original for myself. It was surreal opening a drawer and holding in my hands the very thing my mother had tried to destroy. The handwriting, the seal, the witnesses' signatures, all real, all legal. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage, not even triumph, just quiet, like a storm was finally passing. But my mother, she was just getting louder. She must have caught wind of our progress, because 2 days later, her lawyer sent a scathing response. Our client vehemently denies all accusations and claims the so-called original will is a forgery planted to attack her reputation. Typical: deflect, deny, destroy. But this time she wasn't in control of the story, because Harrow had already submitted the documents to the court, and once verified by the estate judge, everything would shift, not just the legal ownership, but the narrative. I sat in Harrow's office later that week, watching as he prepared the final case packet. "You know," he said, glancing at me, "you could settle. You'd still get most of what was left. Avoid trial, avoid the mess." I looked at the letter from my grandmother again. Her words, "He is my only true family." "No," I said. "She wanted this done right." He nodded. "There's one last thing," he added. "The hospice nurse." My heart jumped. "What about her?" She came forward. Harrow said, "Said your mother tried to have your grandmother declared mentally incompetent the week the second will was signed. Said it didn't go through because the doctor refused." I sat back, stunned. "She tried to strip her rights," I whispered. Harrow nodded grimly. "That's when she pushed the electronic version. Less scrutiny. This woman, this mother of mine, she didn't just want my grandmother's things. She wanted to erase her completely, make her legally invisible. It was psychological. It was pathological. It was unforgivable. But here's the thing about people who build their lives on lies. They don't just fear exposure. They fear irrelevance. My mother needed control, because if she didn't have it, she didn't know who she was. That's why this trial wasn't just about property. It was about power. And I was finally taking it back. Outside the courthouse on filing day, I stood on the sidewalk holding the sealed case packet. A few people walked by. No one knew what I was about to do. But I did. This was for my grandmother, for the version of me that never got to grow up with her hugs, for the stolen years, the silenced love. I stepped inside, handed the clerk the envelope, and with that, the truth officially entered the system. Courtrooms are strange places. They're quiet but tense, like everyone's waiting for something to break. For most people, it's about money or contracts. For me, it was about a stolen legacy. The first hearing was procedural, just a judge reviewing our filing, asking for supporting evidence. My mother didn't show. Her attorney did, though, a stiff-suited man with a forced smile and cold eyes. He argued that our claims were vindictive, that I had no close relationship with the deceased, and that I was exploiting the situation for personal gain. I sat there jaw tight, doing my best to stay calm. But when Harrow stood up, he didn't just argue. He unloaded. He showed the forged signature comparisons, presented the notarized will from the safe deposit box, shared testimony from the hospice nurse, and then the kicker, he played a recording. It was Edith. We had taken a deposition from her the week before. Her voice, though old, rang clear in the courtroom. Speaker's Jesse's grandmother was terrified her daughter would take everything. She told me herself, "Rachel will rewrite everything the second I'm gone." The room was dead, silent. Even the judge leaned forward. Afterward, I stepped into the hallway and took a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. It wasn't over, not by a long shot, but for the first time I felt like we weren't just yelling into a void. People were listening. Then came the escalation. My mother's side launched a smear campaign, not just in court, publicly. Suddenly distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years were posting cryptic statuses on Facebook. Friends of hers shared stories about how I cut off my own mother and was profiting off grief. She went full PR mode, pictures of her at charity events, emotional posts about being betrayed by someone you raised. It was classic manipulation, and it worked on some people. I lost a few friends, got weird stares in grocery stores, even had someone from our old church message me, "How could you do this to your mom after everything she gave up for you?" But I didn't respond, because this wasn't about defending myself anymore. This was about defending the truth. Then came discovery. That's when both sides have to submit every piece of evidence. We gave the letters, the will, the nurse's statement, the court report on her attempted declaration of incompetency. They gave nothing. Her side kept requesting delays, missing deadlines, submitting vague statements. The judge wasn't impressed. "You have until the 15th, she said, or this court will proceed without further defense filings." That moment changed everything, because when a judge sets a hard deadline, you either show up or you surrender. 2 nights before the deadline, I got a message, block number, no caller ID, but I knew who it was. Her voice was calm, even gentle. "Jesse, this is still fixable. I didn't say anything. You can walk away with more than what she would have given you." She continued, "You don't have to do this in front of everyone." She still thought this was about money, still thought I wanted a payout or a compromise, but I didn't. I wanted the world to see her for what she was. So I said one thing, no more hiding, and I hung up. The next morning, her lawyer submitted a motion to settle, but the judge rejected it, because we weren't just in civil territory anymore. The evidence of forgery had triggered an investigation. Now the district attorney was involved. The case had moved into criminal grounds. My mother had crossed a line, and she wasn't going to talk her way out of this one. The next time I saw her, she was in court, no makeup, tight expression, sitting beside her lawyer in silence. The judge entered. The room stood still. Then she said the words, "I'll never forget." Based on the evidence submitted, this court recognizes that a fraudulent will was filed and that Mr. Jesse Whitman is the rightful heir and executor of the estate of Margaret Whitman. No dramatic music, no slow claps, just silence. And then, my mother lowered her eyes, not out of shame, but because she knew the game was over. She had lost control. As the courtroom emptied, Harrow leaned toward me and whispered, "It's done." But it didn't feel like a win. It felt hollow. I had reclaimed what was mine, proved the truth, exposed the lie. But I didn't feel powerful. I felt like a man standing in the wreckage of his childhood, holding a flag that said, "I survived." Some wounds don't bleed, they echo. And the courtroom, despite all its polished walls and gavel taps, became an echo chamber for every unspoken truth between me and my mother. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about everything she stole. After the judge declared the will fraudulent and named me the rightful heir, I thought the rest would be procedural. A quiet transition of documents, a formal acknowledgement. Then we'd both go back to our separate lives. But the state had other plans. The DA decided to press charges: criminal fraud, forgery, suppression of legal documents, and elder abuse. They weren't just going to let her walk. My mother was arrested at home 2 weeks later. It made the news, not because she was famous, but because of the irony. The woman who had painted herself as a saintly single mother, now being fingerprinted in her suburban kitchen. Neighbors talked, friends disappeared, her perfect image shattered. I was called as a witness. That meant testifying in open court about everything, not just the will, but the life she'd rewritten. I remember the moment I stepped into the courtroom for the criminal trial. She was already seated at the defense table, dressed in a muted gray suit, no jewelry, hair pinned back, a woman stripped of all her usual gloss. She didn't look at me. Her attorney did. He stood and gave an opening statement that almost made me laugh if it hadn't made me so angry. "This case isn't about fraud. It's about family conflict. It's about grief, regret, and misunderstandings between a mother and son." Misunderstandings. He made it sound like I was mad because she forgot my birthday. Then it was my turn. They called me to the stand. My palms were sweaty as I swore in. But the moment I began to speak, something clicked. I didn't tremble. I didn't stumble. I told the truth. I spoke about the letters, the isolation, the lies she told me for years. The moment I discovered my grandmother had been writing to me all along. The documents she hid, the digital trail she left behind. And then with the judge's permission, I read aloud the final letter my grandmother had written to me, the one labeled only to be opened if Jesse ever comes looking. The courtroom was still as I read it, every word, every heartbreak. I didn't cry, but others did. Even the court clerk dabbed her eyes. I finished the letter and looked at my mother. For the first time, she wasn't smiling. She looked smaller, like someone realizing the world no longer believed her version of things. The prosecution presented the forensic signature evidence. The hospice nurse gave her testimony. Even the notary whose identity had been forged showed up to say I never witnessed that will. That's not my stamp. That's not my signature. It was a demolition. Brick by brick, the life she had built on lies, manipulation, and control began to crumble. Her attorney tried to spin it. She was under emotional distress. She feared being cut off from her son. She panicked after years of family dysfunction, but no one bought it. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They returned with a unanimous verdict, guilty. She was sentenced to 2 years house arrest, community service, and full restitution of the estate, including legal fees. Some thought it was too light. Others said it was fitting. I didn't care about the punishment, because the real sentence was public exposure. Everyone saw her now. No more masks. No more sweet-voiced justifications. Just a woman stripped of the lies she wore like perfume. After the trial, she tried to reach me. Letters, voicemails. I didn't respond, but there was one thing I did. I sent her a single envelope. Inside was a copy of my grandmother's last letter, the one she never wanted me to find. And across the top I wrote, "You never got the last word." She did. Walking out of that courtroom wasn't a victory lap. It was survival. It was the quiet ache of knowing justice had been served, but at the cost of something you can never get back. Time, love, a childhood that should have felt safe. You imagine justice will feel like standing on a mountaintop, that there will be wind-like clarity. But the truth, it's quiet, lonely, and heavier than you expect. The day after the trial ended, I woke up in my apartment alone. No victory party, no celebration, just a morning like any other, except now my mother was under house arrest. The estate was mine, and everyone knew what she had done. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt numb, because no court ruling can fix what's already broken inside you. The inheritance transfer took about a month. Bank accounts, property deeds, stocks. The estate was worth more than I thought. My grandmother had lived modestly, but saved fiercely. She'd sold her own mother's farm, invested in bonds, even bought life insurance policies with my name as the contingent. She'd planned for me, always, and now I had it. I could buy a better apartment, start my dream woodworking business, donate to the charities she once talked about. But none of it brought her back, and the money didn't erase the years I lost. I visited her grave for the first time in months. The cemetery was quiet, the autumn wind cutting across the grass. I brought coffee, her favorite, and sat down beside the headstone. "Hi, Nan," I whispered. It felt strange, like I was talking to someone through glass. I pulled out one of the old letters she wrote, one of the earliest ones, a silly one, full of stickers and doodles. I read it aloud, and for the first time since the trial, I let myself cry. Not the angry kind, not the hurt kind, but the kind that says, "I miss you. I wish you were here to see me finally safe." That's the thing people don't understand about grief born from betrayal. It doesn't just come in waves, it comes in rewinds. I'd be walking through the grocery store and remember how she used to hold my hand as a kid. Then I'd remember how she let my mother take me without a fight. But then I'd remember why. She did fight. She just lost, because the system didn't believe her, until now. I started going through the lake house next, the one I didn't even know existed until the court order listed it. It was small, tucked away in the woods, 2 hours outside town. Dusty, sun-soaked, frozen in time. Inside, I found boxes labeled Jessie, clothes from when I was 5, drawings I'd made, even VHS tapes, birthday parties, Christmas mornings. She'd kept them, all of them. It was like she'd created a private museum of the life we'd almost had. I watched one of the tapes that night, me sitting on her lap wearing a paper crown, beaming as she held the cake. I looked so happy. I don't even remember that day, but she did. She remembered for both of us. Back in town, people started treating me differently, some with sympathy, others with discomfort, a few with admiration, but none of it mattered, because the only person I ever really wanted to see me, to know me, was gone, and the one person who pretended to know me wasn't allowed to call me for the next 2 years. Still, something softened over time. One day I got a letter, not from my mother, from someone who used to be her friend. It simply read, "I knew what she was doing. I never said anything. I'm sorry." And then another came, and another. Apparently my story, the real story, had touched more people than I thought. People began sharing their own versions of manipulation, of estrangement, of inherited pain. I started collecting them, not to publish, not for attention, just to understand. Because I realized I wasn't the only one who had been shaped by someone else's damage. And then one day, I got a message from my father. We'd kept in touch since the trial, slowly, cautiously, like two strangers trying to remember they were once family. He wrote, "I know I wasn't there, but I want to be now. Maybe we can rebuild from what's left, if you're willing." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I wrote back, "Let's try." Because maybe healing doesn't begin with forgiveness. Maybe it begins with honesty, and one person who refuses to keep lying. For most of my life, I thought forgiveness was a door. Either you walk through it, or you don't. But now, I know it's something else. It's a mirror, and the hardest part is looking into it, and seeing yourself after the wreckage. The estate was officially settled. The lake house was now in my name. My woodworking business had launched small, but mine. I was surviving, even living again. But that question still followed me everywhere. Will you ever forgive your mother? Even people who meant well asked it. Therapists, distant cousins, strangers online who'd followed the trial. And I never knew what to say, because forgiveness isn't something you hand out like candy. Not when the damage is this deep. I saw her once after everything ended. I was picking up materials for a new custom piece, a bench I was carving from cedar for a client. She was in the same store, walking slowly down the aisle. We locked eyes. She looked older, smaller. Not because of prison or public shame, but because she no longer had control. We didn't speak. She gave a weak smile, half genuine, half performance. I nodded once, then turned and walked away, and that was enough. No screaming, no revenge speech, just silence. And sometimes silence is the loudest punishment there is. But something else happened not long after. I found one final letter, hidden inside the back panel of a drawer from her old desk, which had been transferred to the lake house when the estate settled. It was addressed to me, in her handwriting. "Jesse, if you ever read this, I assume I've lost, and maybe I deserve to. But I want you to know something. I truly believed I was protecting you. I grew up with no one. I learned to survive by being smarter than everyone else. Your grandmother saw the world in black and white. I saw the gray. I know you won't forgive me, but maybe one day you'll understand me. That's all I ever wanted." Mom, I stared at the letter for a long time, not out of grief, out of conflict, because a part of me still wanted to hate her, and another part, a smaller one, just felt tired. I didn't respond, but I also didn't destroy it. I folded it, put it back in the drawer, and let it rest there, because some wounds don't close, but they scar, and scars are a sign you survived. It's been 2 years now. I run my shop. I carve pieces with stories behind them, memorial benches, hope chests, urns made from the wood of family trees. Sometimes clients ask why I'm so good at what I do. I tell them, because I spent half my life learning what people try to bury. Forgiveness. I'm still not sure, but here's what I've decided. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen. It doesn't mean letting them back in. It doesn't even mean wishing them well. Sometimes forgiveness is just letting go of the version of yourself they created and becoming someone they can't control anymore. I didn't forgive her the way she wanted, but I moved on without her, and that might be the most powerful kind of freedom there is. If you've made it to the end, thank you. If you've ever been lied to, rewritten, or made to doubt your own memories, this story is for you. You are not broken. You are rewriting yourself just like I did. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to rebuild your truth, and subscribe to Ethan's Way for more stories just like this one, where the quiet fight becomes the loudest justice. See you in the next one.